And I tell my staff now, if there's anything I can tell you guys, don't ever stop learning and don't ever think that you're to the point that that you know it all, because then you just need to get out, because you are going to hurt somebody.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everyone, Kevin McFarland here. Thanks for joining me today on the podcast. I'm releasing this episode on July 1st. And for some of you, it's just another day. But for some of you, it marks the beginning of a terrifying season. No, I'm not talking about bikini season, or the fact that there's only 177 days till Christmas. Shout out to my wife for that little factoid. But if you work at an academic medical center, you know it's intern season. This is the week you'll experience a fresh new crop of residents to care for your patients. I want to remind you to keep your patients safe and remind you that that dopey intern that's driving you crazy today will someday be your favorite attending. So Godspeed to all of you out there. My guest this week has almost 40 years of experience in the nursing game and still loves what she does. We can learn a lot from my guest, Liz Estrada Klein. Enjoy this episode.
Well, my name is Liz Estrada Klein. Most people know me by Liz Estrada. I've only been married a couple years, but I've been Estrada forever and ever. I graduated from nursing school in 1981, so that kind of tells my age, but unfortunately. I've been a nurse for a long time. But I started out in the medical field when I was 19 years old, and I was a registration clerk in Carlsbad, New Mexico, at that time, Guadalupe Medical Center. About a year after I started as a registration clerk, one of my mentors, who was a night nurse, taught me into going to nursing school. I was a single parent, and thought it would be a good way to make some quick bucks and good bucks. And at that time, I was making $3.10 an hour. So that
Holy cow.
$7 or $8, yeah, I know, $7 or $8 an hour as an RN was, man, that was some tall cotton back then. So I went to nursing school.
$7 or $8 an hour. Holy smokes!
Yes,
oh
yeah.
my gosh.
I started out back then you could get your LPN, halfway through the program. I went to a 2-year program at New Mexico State University at the Carlsbad branch. So it was a 2-year program, but halfway through they would let you sit for your LPN boards. So I got my LPN halfway through school, and then finished up with the RN. But I worked full time as a registration clerk, so I worked all night, slept through my classes during the day. Couldn't sleep through clinical. That was kind of hard, but
Yeah.
Graduated in 1981. And so halfway through, I started as an LPN working in the nursery. Thank God I got that out of my system. It was a well baby nursery, and so I was making $7.10 an hour. And, man, that was twice as much as I was making as an ER clerk, so I was just in the bucks. Graduated in 1981 and went all the way up to $9.68 an hour, and I was just thrilled.
Holy smokes.
So, of course, my first love was the ER, but back then they wouldn't even give you a second glance unless you had a year's experience on a med-surg unit, which turned out to be very, very beneficial. So I worked on the med-surg unit for 6 months and threw me into a charge position, pretty much as a new grad. Back then, you talk about telling stories, Kevin. I worked on a surgical unit. It was surgical and peds, and it was in Carlsbad. And we had a 44-bed unit. Most times back then, we only worked 8-hour shifts. So I worked 3 to 11. Of course, you always get stuck on the crappy shifts when you first graduate from school. And 3 to 11 was about the crappiest as you can get.
Yeah, it's a busy shift.
Well, not only that, but you miss out on everything. You can't really do anything in the morning. You miss out on everything at night. But anyway, so I was just happy to have a job. And we had, like I said, a 44-bed unit, surgical patients, post-op, and we literally split the floor between 2 RNs, and we had a charge nurse that did not take patients.
So 22
there were nights.
22 patients. Holy smokes.
Yes, can you believe that? Now, not to say that she didn't work. I mean, she got all the consent signed. Back then, you always came in the night before for your a good night's rest. You got your sleeping pill. You got your bath with your Visahex and, all that stuff. So outpatient surgeries were almost non-existent back then. It was very interesting. I mean, the charge nurse got all the consent signed. They did all the pre-op teaching. They did most of the new admits for us. They would do all the admission paperwork. So we literally, most of the time were full. So we had anywhere from, I would say an easy night was 15 patients.
Wow.
But normally isn't that crazy? Normally we ran about 17 to 20. Once in a while we were full and we had up to 22 patients apiece, but we did team nursing back then, so each RN got an aide, and I'm tell you what, those nurses' aides saved our butts. But Kevin, back then, we still found time to do back rubs. Every patient got a back rub. Every patient got, yes, they got, you laugh, but I mean, well, I'll go into my sympathy for these new nurses that are coming out of school here in a minute, but
yeah.
But every patient got a back rub. We started rounding on 9 o'clock meds at 8. So the aide went with us while we gave the medications. They had the patient up in the chair for 15 or 20 minutes for the last time. They got their bed straightened and changed if it needed it. They got their face washed, they got their teeth brushed, and they got a back rub. And we would do that for every patient, even if we had 22 that night.
Holy cow.
And, yeah, sometimes, it took us 2 to 2.5 hours to pass our 9 o'clocks, but if you had a good aide with you, you were in and out of that room, and that patient felt like they were really taken care of. I mean, can you imagine?
That's awesome.
Back rubs.
Right.
But, so that was pretty rough, but I did that for a year. And there was finally an opening in the ER. So I transferred down to the ER again to the 3 to 11 shift because that's what was open. And loved it. Back then, we had no ER techs. It was one nurse to a shift. You had a physician there 24/7, but you were by yourself. And we had a pretty high census back then. It wasn't unusual for us to see anywhere from 15 to 25 patients on my 3 to 11 shift, and we had a 7-bed ER.
Holy
so
cow.
We rolled them in and out. Yeah, we rolled them in and out pretty quick, and there wasn't any of these $500 workups. They came in for something, we treated exactly what they were there for, and they were out. And they followed up with their doctor for the rest of their stuff. We didn't do the barrage of testing that they do now. So it was a totally different world. Then within 5 years, my manager, or they called them directors at that hospital, we didn't have an assistant or anything, but she had considered taking a job out of the WIP site. And if anybody's from New Mexico, they know that that's a waste isolation pilot plant. And it was a nuclear waste facility. Big controversy back then.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't want that in New Mexico, first of all. But they had an opening for a nurse in their medical facility that they had out there. So she was considering taking it because they were paying $15 an hour.
Hoorah.
That was
big money.
Quite the raise from her pay as a measly director in a hospital. So anyway, she ended up leaving, and I ended up taking her job as manager. So literally, I've been in middle management since 1987, I guess.
That's a little while.
Time. Yeah, a long time. I worked in Carlsbad for over 30 years as a nurse manager, and you know how they mix things up a bit, and they have crunches, and sometimes I had ICU along with ER, sometimes it was just ER, but a little over 30 years. And then Community Health System, CHS, bought the hospital, and they also own the hospital in a community about an hour and a half away, Roswell, New Mexico. And the facility there was without a manager for a couple of years. They kept having interim. So they asked me if I would go over there and help them out. And so I did that for 2 years, and then I just decided that it was time to do something different. Another community, a small rural hospital, about 30 minutes from Roswell and kind of in between Carlsbad and Roswell, had a position open up for an ER manager, and actually the ER director called me and asked me if I would consider coming, and I did that for 4 years, and now I am in Ruidoso, New Mexico, and I actually would have stayed in this little community hospital, but if anybody knows anything about New Mexico, Ruidoso is a beautiful mountain community.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's just gorgeous. I mean, skiing in the wintertime, they have a horse track here in the summertime, so it's fairly busy all year round, and it is a critical access hospital. But I've been here almost 5 years now, and it's where I am sliding into retirement.
Good for you. That's awesome.
So that's the story.
Nice. At what point in your nursing career were you like absolutely sure that this was what you were meant to do? Like you were like, yep, this is my life. This is what I'm going to do.
You know what? That's an interesting question, because I will be totally honest with you. As a single parent at 19, I totally went to nursing school for the money. Totally.
In it for the money.
And it was good money back then. That's right, $7. So,
that's funny.
I didn't know anything about patient care. I didn't know anything about HCAPs or, making the patient happy. And honestly, I hated blood and guts. But I just thought, man, what an opportunity. You go to college for 2 years and you can come out making double what I was making as a clerk. So I did it.
It's hard to beat.
And and I think I started realizing when I actually got out of school and got on the floor, but I was so busy just trying to figure out what to do that I don't think I really thought about it until I got to the ER, which of course was my first love, starting out there as a registration clerk.
Yeah.
And probably within the first 3 months of working 3 to 11 shift in an ER by myself, being totally autonomous and having to literally hold people's lives in my hands sometimes because I was the only one to make the decision, I thought this is what I was meant to do. And so I had probably been out of school almost 2 years before I decided that this was really my calling.
Huh, that's cool. It's kind of funny. I've asked a dozen people that question so far, and I've gotten everything from one person said they were absolutely meant to do it from day one, and others were like, I'm still not really sure that this is my long term. and of course, this is somebody who's been a nurse for 20 years, and it's always interesting to see like how long it takes to be like, all right, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
You know what? I never looked back when I finally thought this is my niche. This is where I belong. I have never looked back, and I've been happy for almost 38 years, I guess.
It's a lot to be said for that. To be said for that. So, tell me about a patient that changed the way you practice.
I'll tell you about a patient that was early in my career. It was maybe about 2 years maybe after I started working in the ER, after I came off of med-surg. And again, I was in the ER by myself. By this time we were really overstaffed, and we were allowed to have a tech. And it was usually a basic EMT that was helping us. So we had a car wreck come in, and there were 4 adolescents, they were teenagers, that were involved in this car wreck. 2 of them were dead at the scene.
Holy cow.
And this was right around graduation time. One of the persons that was in one of the vehicles was, 2 of them were very critical, but they were in opposite vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was the child of a very influential person that was in town. And the other one was, let me just say, he was very well known by the police department.
Yeah.
The one that was well known by the police department was more critical than the other one. And the other one, quite honestly, was pretty much brain dead when he came in.
Wow.
We were keeping him alive on the ventilator, but there was absolutely no signs of any kind of life other than, his heart was still beating.
Yeah.
The other child was salvageable, totally. I mean, he had very critical injuries, but he was totally salvageable. And the thing that struck me about, and probably changed my whole outlook of emergency medicine, hopefully for the better, was that the surgeon that responded saw, obviously, who both of these kids were. He didn't know the one, that we knew, that we were familiar with, and the police were familiar with.
Yeah.
He didn't know him from Adam, but he did know the parents of this other child. And he spent every effort trying to save the child who was essentially brain dead.
Wow.
All resources on this child, and the other one was literally left in the other room behind a curtain with me as the nurse trying to save his life.
Wow.
And he died, the one that I was taking care of. And the other one we sent off to UNM for, to see if they could do anything. And he eventually expired. I believe he was even an organ donor, which was very good for the family to decide something like that. But the thing that it did for me, Kevin, is that it was quite obvious why the surgeon chose what he chose to do. And I think from that point on, I guess you could call a crusader for the underdog.
Yeah.
And, it didn't matter what their background was. Everybody got treated the same. And I to this day, it still irritates me when people come in and they say, "Do you know who I am?" Because it takes me right back to that moment.
Yeah, you're like, nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody cares. Exactly.
Nobody cares.
Yeah, we're here to take care of you, just like we're here to take care of the homeless guy that just walked across the street.
Yeah, I remember we had a homeless guy who was in the waiting room, and he was just sitting there quietly, very quiet, very respectful. This guy was an interesting dude. He had this big, like, satanic-looking tattoo on his face that made him, of course, look pretty interesting sitting in the waiting room. And he was sitting all alone, all by himself. And I went out and talked to him, and he'd been there for quite a long time. And I was like, "Hey, you haven't checked in or anything. Do you need anything?" And he's like, "I wasn't really sure what to do." And he had just gotten out of jail, didn't have any of his meds. And he was like, I don't really know what to do. So I'm like, okay, well, let's get you seen, see if there's anything we can do, and let me see if I can get my social worker to see you. So as I'm sitting there talking to this guy, this woman comes up, and she's dressed in this, like, nice suit and everything else. And you know how unique that place is, that you can have the homeless person next to a senator and nobody would even notice. And this woman comes up and goes, "Excuse me, we need to be seen, and we're waiting. We've been waiting for a really long time." And she just looks at me like, "Can you take care of us?" And I just looked at her like, "What are you doing, lady? Can't you see I'm taking care of somebody right now?" She just looked at me like, "You're taking care of him?" And she's like, "Instead of taking care of these people that just waste our system, why don't you take care of the sick people?" And I looked at her and I go, "Are you for even a second suggesting that you deserve better care than this gentleman here?" And I said it loud enough that people in the waiting room heard it, and everyone was like, "Ugh." And I was like, "Go sit your ass down." And she just looked at me like, it's like, "Go sit down." I like shouted at her again. I was like, "Go sit down." And she just looked at me like, "Oh," and just kind of slinked away. And I was so disgusted. I was like, "Come on, we take care of everybody here, and I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you have." We used to have people tell us that all the time. They're like, "Hey, I can't afford any of this." I'm like, "Nah, neither can anybody else." And I liked working for that kind of hospital. So,
yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting, what people's perception of good care is, even.
Yeah, you're right.
People that, if you can get them in and out in 15 minutes, they don't care if you call them every name in the book while you got them back there.
Right.
It's good care.
Yeah.
And then you have other people that are just grateful that you're even, paying attention to them. It's amazing.
Yeah, I love taking care of people. I love taking care of people who appreciate being taken care of. That's who I like taking care of.
Yeah, exactly.
So, tell me about the first medication error you ever made.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna love this one. So I was on the med-surg unit. It was right after I got out of school, and it was a I call it med-surg because that's just used what I'm calling, but it was actually a surgical pediatric unit. We had a small wing that took care of pediatric patients. So I had this baby who was in with colic, if you can believe that. I mean, we actually put babies in the hospital for colic back then.
Wow.
And the mom and dad were just exhausted. They had been there for a couple days, so they went home. And the charge nurse actually was, we were all taking turns kind of holding the baby at the nurse's station, And so I went off to do my 9 o'clock meds, and I came back. And I don't even remember how I found out that I did this, other than I think the charge nurse was smart enough that she caught on to it. But there was some Donatol elixir. I don't even know if they make it anymore, because we used to use it in GI cocktails and for lots of different things, for stomach cramps and stuff. But the child was supposed to get, I think he was supposed to get like 0.1 cc or something like that, like in a little TB syringe, just like a drop every couple of hours. So I was passing my 9 o'clocks, and the nurse's aide was straightening up the little crib sheet and everything, and I was taking my time sitting down holding the baby while she was doing that. And I gave the baby his medicine, and charge nurse was making rounds about 30 minutes later and went in the room, and the child was snoring, and so she went in and checked the baby, and she couldn't wake the baby up.
Uh-oh.
And I mean, he would, with stimulation, he would startle and he'd open his eyes and look, but then he'd just like totally go back. I mean, this kid was gorked.
Yeah.
So she came to me and she said, "What did you just give him his 9 o'clock meds?" And I said, "Oh yeah, and I'm, Miss Nancy nurse. Oh yeah, I gave him his Donatol, and and she said, "How much did you give him?" And I don't know. The back of my head, I was just like, oh, I screwed up something. I did something. And so I went in with her, and here's this baby laying there, and, just like zonked out of his mind. And I looked at the syringe, and I said, well, I gave him this much. And it was like 3/4 of the syringe. So I really overdosed this kid like by like 3 times the dose of Donatol.
Oh my.
Yeah. And luckily the dose was on the shallow end. I mean, you can imagine giving 0.1, 0.01 or whatever it was. And so, but I actually gave him like 3 or 4 times more than what the order was for. My charge nurse, and God bless her soul, thank God she is now not here among us anymore. She's among the angels, because they probably would have jerked her license if anybody heard this. But so we made a fresh pot of coffee, very strong coffee, and cooled it down. And she sat in that room for 2 hours and fed that kid caffeine.
Holy cow! Oh my gosh.
And by the time night shift came on at 11 o'clock, that kid was wired.
That's pretty funny.
And I can tell you, this is against every single rule that you will ever learn as a nurse. We never made an incident report out. We never told anybody about it. We just took care of it, and the child was fine, and nobody knew the better.
Oh, jeez. We'll strike that out of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, you might want to delete that part.
The director in you is probably going, "Oh my God, this could be happening in my ER right now."
Yeah. No, but I know it. I know if one of my staff would have done
You
that, I
kill
would have
him.
had a hemorrhage. But actually, what we ended up doing, I mean, we weren't totally false about it. We did talk to the manager the next day and say, "Look, this is what happened." We went to the physician and told them, and he laughed about it. He was like, "Oh my God, you fed this kid caffeine for 2 hours?" And we're like, "Yeah." And I mean, it was
Kid's buzzing.
let me say, I never lived it down the rest of the time I was on the floor, but
I bet.
and they didn't really give me peds after that either.
They're like, no. They're like, "Psst, Liz doesn't do pediatrics. No.
Exactly.
Take him to another room."
Back then, the nurses, they were all afraid to do pediatrics, and I was one of these nurses. I was like a sponge. I mean, give me anything new and I'll do it. So I was one of the few nurses that would actually take the peds hall.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all I had because there were like 12 rooms. And other times I would have that wing and maybe a partial other wing because we just, we only had 2 nurses, so we had to split it. But
Yeah.
it was just really hard to get. And I was a low man on the totem pole, so I always got stuck with the peds anyway.
Yeah, they're like, "Hey, new guy, go take care of the peds
Mikey
patient."
will do it. One of those things.
That's funny. Tell me about a patient who touched your heart. A patient that you'll never forget.
Wow. Okay. This was in Carlsbad again. All of my horrendous stuff happened. Well, I worked there 30 years, so what do you expect? But,
it's time.
I had a patient come in who, at the time, was 23. He was 23 years old. He tried to kill himself with a shotgun, put it under his chin, and pulled the trigger. And the only thing he managed to do was shoot his face off.
Oh.
So he came in alert, oriented, never lost consciousness. He had one eye and everything from one side of his face and the orbit on the eye that he had left down was gone. His chin was hanging, kind of on his chest. So he essentially had no airway other than the hole that you could see,
Holy cow.
Through his face.
Yeah.
So, of course, he couldn't talk, but he was alert. He would shake his head. He would squeeze, you would say, squeeze twice for yes, once for no, and he would answer your questions appropriately. He lived. I mean, we got an airway in him. He came in kind of in a tripod position, so all the blood would, fall out. And he had an airway when he came in that wasn't, they didn't put an airway in because
holy cow. Yeah, because
didn't know what the hell to do with him.
Yeah, I was like, like where?
Yeah, what do you do? So we got a tube in him. We RSI'd him and put a tube in and shipped him off to, I believe it was UNM, and later found out that they had transferred him to some other tertiary center outside of the state for reconstruction. Once they got him past, that point. I would say about a year and a half later, I had somebody come up to the door and asked for me by name. And so I went out there, and there was this guy that, I mean, you could tell, had something. I thought he would. Initially, I thought it was a burn patient that I had taken care of.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And I'm going to tell you about 2 of them, if you don't mind. But
no.
So anyway, this guy comes up, and he asked for me, and I went to the window, and I, can I help you? And he said, "Do you remember me?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, obviously not." He didn't look. He obviously looked a little bit different than when I saw him.
Yeah.
But he said, "A year and a half ago, I tried to kill myself, and you were my nurse." And I said, "Well, how in the world do you remember that? I mean, how did you even remember my name?"
Right.
And he said, "What I remember was that you stayed with me the whole time. You held my hand, and you told me that life was worth it.
Holy cow.
And
wow.
it was, I guess it was very profound, obviously. And he was very thankful. He was still had a trach. He was still trying to, form words. You can imagine they reconstructed everything.
Yeah.
And, but he did not look bad for somebody that didn't have a face.
Yeah.
And he told me that he had started college, and he was in a program, and he wanted to be a social worker. And so that's, I never saw him again after that, but his parents lived in town, and so I kind of kept track of him that way.
Wow.
And so he ended up graduating from college and becoming a social worker, and he dealt with adolescents that were depressed and suicidal, and that was his calling.
Holy cow! Talk about giving back to something that pulled you from the edge.
Yeah,
holy
exactly.
smokes!
Now the second one I want to tell you about was if anybody listens from New Mexico and remembers back then, we had an explosion that made national news in the Carlsbad area, and it was a family of about 15 or 16 people that were having a family reunion, and they were all camped out at this area called Black River. And unfortunately, there was this huge gas line that ran right through the area that they were camping in, but it was a very attractive area, had lots of trees, it had a little swimming hole that had a rope on a tree, and, it was just a really cool place to camp. So there was probably 15 to 18 of his family members that were there, and there was a leak in the gas line, and the line exploded.
Holy cow!
And I've never wanted to work in a burn unit, and still don't have any desire. That's probably one of my least favorite nursing things that I would ever want to do. But of course, there were multiple casualties, but anybody that's ever worked with burns, they can be talking to you one minute, and the next minute their airways shut off, and they're practically dead. So we called a disaster because we had like 12 very critical patients that were coming in, and we had helicopters and planes coming from all over to take these people to various burn units. But there was a patient that really was kind of a low triage in the field, and they found him. They just kind of put him up against one of the fire trucks and said, "Here, stay here. Here's an oxygen mask. We'll be back to get you in a minute," because he was actually walking, talking, and knew where he was at. He was just burned from head to toe.
Wow.
And so they were taking care of the critical patients. Well, when they brought him in, he was assigned to me. He got my bed, and so. By the time they brought him in, they did get IVs on him. I don't know how. They did it through all the burn skin. He had probably 90%, and it was kind of hard to tell, but I knew it was minimum second and probably most third-degree burns.
Yeah.
So I knew that he was not probably going to make it. But to go from, sitting there talking to him, and 3 hours later, they, of course, had to triage the patients that they were taking out, too, and took the most critical ones out first. Within an hour, we had RSI'd him and intubated him.
Wow.
But, there was just, for whatever reason, the physician, it was one of those where they really didn't give him enough to paralyze him really good, so I was trying to talk to him and, give him as much pain medicine as I could and those kinds of things. And he never made it to the flight. And so to see somebody that was pretty much ambulatory come in, and 3 hours later, you watched him die.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was again, probably one of the biggest impressions that I've had in my nursing career, that, And I just, those people that work in those burn units, oh my God, they're saints. They're just angels walking on earth.
Special place in heaven for them.
Yes, it is. But those are my two stories.
Wow. Those are good stories. Holy cow. Tell me about a patient, tell me, what's the best advice a nurse mentor ever gave you?
Probably the best advice was the nurse that worked graveyards with me when I was in nursing school or started nursing school that taught me into it. And one of the things that she told me was, don't ever let your emotions take over until it's over. And that's really hard to do in an emergency setting, especially with there are things that touch different people. Some people just, they just can't take care of kids, or they just can't stand to see kids sick. And some people it's geriatric patients, and other people it's, drug addicts or alcoholics or, different things. And for her, she was the type of person that everybody touched her, Yeah. And I thought, how does this person work in an environment like this where there can be so much tragedy? It's not like working in OB where you have, wonderful deliveries 99.9% of the time and it's all happy.
Yeah.
There's tragedies that you see every single day, and they may not die, but you may send them out the door knowing they're going to be right back, within hours or days. But, and so I sat her down one night, we had some time, and I said, how do you do this? And she said, you can never let your emotions take over until it's over. And I never really understood what she talked about until I had these experiences that we just talked about. Yeah. And you don't even think about it. All you're thinking about is, what can I do to make this person comfortable? What can I do to make his last breath, as good as I can make it? What can I do to save his life? What can I do to make this better? Until it's over, and then it's like, you never feel like you do enough.
You're like, okay, now I can go cry in the corner.
Yeah. You just never lose it until it's over. Yeah. And then you talk about an adrenaline drop. But I never really understood what she said, and it was probably the best piece of advice that I could have ever gotten, because anytime I get in a situation like that, even just a code situation, and anybody that's worked in the ER, codes are just, you just do them by rote almost.
Yeah, you just do it.
And it's like, yeah, you do this, yeah, it's VFib, we do this, and you just do it automatically. But there are those certain patients that just tug at your heartstring, and you cannot let that emotion take over until you've done everything that you can do.
It's true. You always have to wait. You always have to wait and, have your breakdown on your way home. You're like, I don't have time for this until later tonight.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've never been one of those. I mean, now they have all these, critical incident stress debriefings. And, the hospital I work for is big with what they call code lavenders, when you have this, you have a code or something very emotional happen in your unit, they'll call a code lavender, and everybody comes down and they pat you on the back and they talk to you. And I have never been one of those people that want to participate in one of those things. Just leave me alone. I'll work it out myself, and I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll do the same thing all over again.
Yeah, I think that's kind of me too.
Yeah. I mean, but there are other people that, as soon as it's over, they're wanting to know when you're going to get the team together, and that's great that they can. I've always been very envious of those people that they can talk about it and get it out of their system and feel so much better. And I just have my own way of dealing with it, and that I've always come back to deal with it again the next day. And I've never felt like I was burnt out or overextended or hell, I don't think I've even taken 2 weeks off my whole career at the same time.
Oh, you need to take some time off, Liz. Come on.
I know my staff tells me that too. Get the hell out of here with it.
You know, I you know me, and we talked about this before we started recording, but I'm a little bit of a workaholic. But it's easy to do when you like what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, like there's been times where I was like maybe a little crispy, but I don't think I've ever been like fully burnt out. But I get where people get it. I mean, I get where people get burnt out because, I mean, damn, sometimes it's hard.
It really is. And, you know, in this day and age, especially working in the emergency room, really any medical field, but especially in the emergency room, it's so freaking violent anymore.
Yeah.
And I am so lucky to work for a facility that is totally into safety for the staff. And, you know, we just make great strides since I've been here. And, you know, it's just... you know, with that and the emotional thing that goes on with it, with some of the patients that you're dealing with and the criticality of the patients, and then, you know, sometimes the thanklessness of your job, and people like to describe that, you know, why aren't you taking care of me? I've got a hangnail, and, you know, why are you taking care of that chest pain first?
Yeah.
You know, I totally understand how people can get to that point, but thank God I myself have never considered myself burnout or to that point. I don't know why. I just that's the way I'm made, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good thing. That's that'll help keep your career longer than maybe some. So
yeah.
What advice would you give a brand new emergency nurse starting in your ER?
So many different things. Never stop learning.
That's a big one.
That's probably, and I've told that to every student that's come through. I've told that, you know, to every new person that's started in my ER. And I've gone the gambit, you know. I've gone, you know, back when I started, oh no, you know, I'm not going to hire anybody in my ER unless they've had a year's experience somewhere else. I've hired brand new graduates. I've hired 2-year RNs. I've hired 4-year RNs. I've hired bachelor's, master's degree RNs if this is their first time in the ER. And I tell them, you know, on their first day of their orientation, they usually spend with me and going over, you know, all of the stuff that you have to go over. But we sit down and we talk about ER and how stressful it can be, and that if you ever reach the point that you think you know everything and you're comfortable with that, you need to find another job.
Yep, get out. You're going to hurt somebody.
Yeah. And, you know, I've been doing this for 38 years, and there's not a week that goes by that I don't learn something.
Yeah.
You know, and it's something that I've done wrong for the last 20 years. And, you know, how embarrassing is that? But I'm not afraid to admit it, you know, and I tell my staff now, you know, if there's anything I can tell you guys, don't ever stop learning, and don't ever think that you're to the point that, you know, that you know it all, because then you just need to get out, because you are going to hurt somebody.
Yep, you're totally going to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
I always laugh when, you know, you get the new person who comes in and they act like they've seen it all and they've done it all, and you're like, oh, you're cute.
Exactly.
You're like, exactly. Oh, you're cute until you're not. Until you're not cute, you're going to hurt somebody. So.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes I find that people that act like that, it's kind of a defense mechanism for them. You know, I don't know, something that's happened in their personal life maybe, but maybe they're afraid to admit that they don't, you know, that they don't have that fear, I guess, is the only thing. I'm afraid every time a code rolls through the door, I get just a little twinkle in the pit of my stomach, you know, and those type of things are what keep me in emergency nursing, those codes and those MVAs and those critical traumas. I mean, that's what gets your adrenaline going. Anybody that works in an ER knows that, it's the adrenaline that keeps you there. But there's never, ever a patient that comes through that door that, that's critical, that I don't still get that little, oh my God, what if I do something wrong? What if I don't do something?
No, totally.
And once you lose that, you might as well just find somewhere else to work.
Yeah.
Go to home health, or I'm not saying those, get out of the critical care setting.
Yeah, absolutely. The last question I have for you is a hard one. It's a doozy. It's called 3 Things. What I'm going to ask you to do is give me 3 things that an emergency nurse should always remember, and 3 things that an emergency nurse could just forget.
Okay. Specific to ER, so that's good. Okay. So 3 things that emergency nurse should always remember is, I would say the first thing is to treat every patient as you would want your family member treated.
Absolutely.
That's extremely hard to do, especially when they are, being belligerent and, hard to deal with. Secondly, I would say, boy, that's tough. Again, I would go back to the learning. Never stop learning.
Yeah.
And then the third thing would be never lose your compassion.
Absolutely.
And that's hard to do when you're in a setting like this every day. And, even sometimes the critical patients. I mean, I work in a facility where we see a lot of alcoholism, and we see a lot of drugs because of the influx of tourists and things that we have in our community. And, you look at a 23-year-old that is dying from liver failure because they've been drinking since they were 8. And, it's really hard sometimes to say, you brought this on yourself. What do you expect?
Yeah.
And you just can never, ever lose that compassion. You can't.
Yep, it's true.
3 things that I would tell a new person in the ER to forget would be number 1 would be forget 90% of the things that you learn in nursing school. And my percentages might be off a little bit, but especially for the ones that are going through 2-year programs, it's very difficult. No, I'll take that back. It's harder for the ones going through a BSN program, I think. The ones that go through an ADN program are, kind of thrown out there, and they don't always get, all of the clinical before they graduate, and so it's kind of like on-the-job training. BSN programs are a little more structured, and but to me, what happens in the textbook is not what happens in real life, and they don't always get that in their clinicals, even in a BSN program. So first thing I would say is forget a lot of the things that you learn in nursing school.
Yeah.
Throw that out the door. Second thing is seasoned nurses are not always the best nurses. And I say
that's a tough one.
Yeah, I say that because I have seen as a manager, I'm very particular about preceptors, and especially precepting people that are coming into the ER brand new with no experience, whether it's a new nurse or whether it's somebody that's been on med-surg for 10 years and they're trying something different. They're still new to the ER. I try and put them with somebody that I know practices safe nursing, and I'm not saying that some of the nurses that I've had on my units don't practice safe nursing, but let's face it, in an emergency department setting or any critical care setting, you're going to learn some shortcuts.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes those shortcuts are not always safe. Yeah. And so I always tell them, if you ever see something that a nurse is doing And it's like, oh, that's not how they showed us to do it in nursing school, or that's not how I saw so-and-so do it yesterday. Come and talk to me about it. Don't ever be afraid to do that, because we learn bad habits along the way, and
That's
sometimes
true.
those bad habits get passed off on others. And sometimes the older nurses or the more seasoned nurses, it's so ingrained in them that they've been doing it that way for 20 years. Nobody's ever called them on it, and that's just how they're going to show somebody else how to do it too. So, the third thing would be I don't know how to put this, but I think it's very important for new people to know, especially in a critical care setting, because I see it happening a lot. And I don't know if it would be something for them to forget, but I think it's a very important point that, you always hear the old adage of nurses eat their young.
Yep.
It's very true. I just went to a seminar in New Orleans a few months ago, and it was on team building, actually, but they had several different segments on bullying in the workplace, and it was such an eye-opener. I just, there were things that were brought up that I would think, oh my gosh, so-and-so does that on day shift, or, oh my gosh, I see that happening on nights. Oh my God, I do that, and I think it's these fresh minds come into the setting in an emergency department, and they have this idealistic view of saving everybody and being the angel of mercy, and they're going to learn everything in a year, and they're going to be just like that nurse over there that's been there for 20 years and is so confident. And forget that.
Yep.
Forget that. And there will be people that try and trip you up, or that they see that you're working circles around them, and it's making them look bad, and they're not always your team player, that's got your back. So, in a respect, that does happen, and I've seen it happen in every ER. I think it's only natural, probably every setting, not just in ER.
Yeah, no, I think it's everywhere.
Yeah, but I think that would be the advice that I would give them.
Yeah, good. That's good advice. That's all the questions.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I enjoyed talking to you, as always.
Liz, thank you so much. This was awesome. This was really, really good. You did a great job.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.